the Primitive Patterns Podcast. It's time to live your mystery. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Primitive Patterns Podcast. Today, got a very special guest on. We got Patrick Koo, fellow Canadian, out in Vancouver. We've been following this guy for a long time.
You may know him as the thoughtful meathead.
You probably know him as
That's probably how you know him.
Been following him for a long time. Really love what he's all about. I think we align pretty heavily on a lot of stuff when it comes to overall human health and movement. And we've talked about doing this for a while. So, I mean, it's awesome that we actually get the opportunity to talk to you today. So, Patrick, how's it going?
Pretty good, man. It's 10 a.m. over here, so been at work for a little while now, but happy to talk to you boys.
Yeah, awesome. We appreciate you taking the time to hop on here. I mean, I guess just to get it started, just to have the audience like know a little bit about you and kind of what you do. If you could give the audience a bit of a background, who you are, what you do, and maybe how you got started on the journey of the path that you're currently on.
Yeah, for sure, man. So lifelong athlete, multi-sport athlete growing up, but I was also a book nerd. Like I was the kind of guy to get like really good grades, and then your friends are like telling you like, bro, why are you studying so much, man? That's gay. That's gay, dude. And then my big thing to fall back on was like, well, fuck, like I'm still the captain of all the sports teams, so fuck you guys.
Yeah.
So like I've just been like,
I am Asian, so
yeah, there you go.
it's in the blood, boys.
It's in the blood, boys. So so that was kind of like my thing growing up, which is like I was just always either just like learning stuff and reading or playing sports. And so I knew that in terms of like career wise, like I had to be doing something in terms of like movement and training and sports and stuff like that. Fast forward to when I was a teenager, 14 years old, did a big old 5-gram mushrooms trip. And then I wouldn't recommend that to a 14-year-old, but just the story is that like, I remember like the clear kind of lesson or thing that I got out of that, my first trip, was this whole line of thinking of where I was like, oh shit, dude, it doesn't matter whether you have $100 million in the bank and a yacht and a big house and all that can go away tomorrow. And all you really own are your body and your mind. So you better just take care of those things and make sure those two things are tip top if you want to live a good life. And so that was the big lesson when I was a teenager, continued to play sports, continued to be a book nerd. And then when I got out of high school, I started my personal training business. And then at the same time, I was going to school full time to study kinesiology and psychology. So it took me like 6 or 7 years to graduate because I turned it into kind of like a co-op. You guys have co-op in your universities? Yeah. So I did like my own like self co-op kind of thing. So I've been in the business of training and coaching for going on 12 years now. And yeah, that's the story, man. That's
awesome.
The story.
I mean, I really want to dive into the training and kind of like who the people you looked up to the most in that field were when you were kind of getting into it, but I can't let the 14-year-old 5-gram mushroom trip kind of just like slide on by. So we don't have to talk about this for an extended period of time unless you want to. But
sure,
give me a little more there. Like how the fuck did that happen?
I don't know. There was one guy that I grew up with. One of my best friends. His name was Andre Perez. And he was hanging around a bunch of scrubs, man. But like I always thought he was a good dude.
Not book nerd athletes, eh?
Yeah, definitely not book nerd athletes. But I love that guy. Yeah, he was getting into all kinds of different experimentation and all that kind of stuff. And I had always been interested in psychedelics because I was a big Beatles fan. When I was like 8 years old, I discovered the Beatles, and then shortly after, like you do a little Wikipedia search when you're like 9 years old and you're like, oh, damn, most of this music was written on like weed and acid. Like there must be something to it. So I've always been curious. Right. And then, so my buddy, Andre, was doing psychedelics. And then he asked me, he's like, hey, you want to try mushrooms? And I said, yeah. And then we went on a trip at the local park. Went for
There
a
you
long
go.
walk.
Must have been one wild dude to be like, it's one thing to be like, hey, you want to take some mushrooms? Like, yeah, sure, I'll take some mushrooms. All right, how about 5 Gs?
Yeah. Yeah, it was
'Cause-
a send. It was a send for sure. I
yeah,
definitely wouldn't recommend it, but
yeah.
hey.
I won't get too deep into it either, but me and my older bro Luke, who's not here today, but we did roughly the same amount. That this was only like 2 years ago. So I was like, well into my 20s. And exact same thing. I tell people, I'm like, I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just personally saying that I wouldn't necessarily recommend it because it was heavy. A lot of shit came up, but I do like what you said about, that was one of the main drivers and one of the lessons that you learned to setting your core values and your beliefs as to like what is truly important. We talk about it all the time with some of the experimentation that we've done within the realm of psychedelics. And the one thing that it did for us, and kind of sounds like for you, is, growing up as somebody that valued their mind, as you said, reading a lot and being an athlete and valuing your body, did it necessarily teach you a lesson, or did it just allow you in the clearest way you've ever felt to remember what is truly important to you? Because I found a lot of the breakthroughs or things that I've gotten out of those experiences, it's like, I already knew this shit. It's just like, maybe I forgot, or I let the chaos of life and the stress of life and the material world and everything that goes along with that to allow me to forget. And it just brought into, the forefront of my mind in the clearest way I've ever experienced, a clarity on remembering what's truly important, what you value, and how you want to cultivate your life around that.
Yeah, I would definitely side with you on that one. It's definitely the latter. It's one thing to cognitively know these things, and then it's another thing to like understand it on like a deep bodily level. Yeah, nothing more to say about that. I think that's the big tool or that's one of the big benefits of psychedelic drugs, which is just giving you access to that deep knowing, because everybody knows that love is the answer. Everybody knows that kindness is the answer. Everybody knows that taking care of your body and that your body is your temple and all that. But it's another thing to like really, really understand and be shown that on a visceral level.
Yeah, I love that, dude. So is that also where, like, 14, you take that experience and then you're like thoughtful meathead? That's what it is.
No.
So how did that name? How'd you come up with that, the thoughtful meathead? Because when I saw that, I was like, that is dope. I like that.
Appreciate that, man. I don't know. I just came up with it on a whim. Like growing up, me and all my buddies would call each other like. Sorry. So which one is like Josh out of you guys? Josh and
that's a very common question we get all the time. This guy right here.
Right. Okay, cool. So it's like, let's just say we had like a buddy named Josh, and Josh was like, loved to fucking mac on girls and was a rugby player and fucking was like was like the biggest bro scientist of all time. So then your name would be Josh Meat. And then I'm like a guy who's like, I fucking love snowboarding, fuck helmets, we're just riding boys, fucking doing backflips, all this shit. I'm Pat Meat. So it's like everybody. So it's like I just grew up with a bunch of meatheads who called each other a bunch of meatheads.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like what I identified as, and then I guess just on a whim I put like the thoughtful kind of prefix on it to kind of attract the kind of internet conversations that I wanted to have, as well as obviously from a business perspective to kind of try to attract the clients that I get along with best.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. So I do want to get into, because you mentioned snowboarding there. I mean, like we said, we've followed you for a long time. So I don't know if I know the whole story, but I know you've dealt with your fair share of injuries. And I know that there was one in particular that definitely affected you in a big way. So we'll get into that. But kind of a side note on that is I also know you talk so much about what cultivates smooth, pain-free human movement. I know that I've seen a bunch of content on your page, amazing content. So if you don't follow Patrick, highly couldn't recommend that more. I really like his insights on that. But let the audience know, and myself too, because I want to learn from you. maybe some misconceptions that not only the general population has on, is it even possible to be pain-free, or what smooth movement and pain-free movement, what cultivates that? But in your opinion, what does cultivate that, and maybe some misconceptions that general population, even fitness professionals, may have surrounding the topic?
Cool. So I think smooth movement and pain-free are two distinctly different things, although there is overlap. But let's talk about smooth movement first. The biggest common misconception that I get all over the place is that better joint mobility and better flexibility equals smoother, more coordinated movement. So you're essentially taking like a purely structural lens of, okay, if I have more motion in this one joint, then that's going to translate into me moving with more grace. So that's like a very structure heavy view on movement. When the reality is, yes, the structure matters, because if you're not strong enough and you're not mobile enough in your joint and you've got certain joint restrictions, yeah, sure, that might impede your movement quality. But at the end of the day, it's really important to understand that all movement, whether you're eating a bowl of cereal or taking a shit or going for a run or any kind of movement, is controlled by the nervous system. And so if we can kind of think of like, okay, the process of improving movement is kind of, yes, it has to do with improving the hardware, bone density, muscle mass, et cetera, et cetera. But if we can view it as mainly the process of upgrading the software, then that's when we receive the biggest gains in actually feeling more comfortable in our body, moving more smoothly, moving with more grace. And so the rabbit hole on like, okay, so the next question is, how do we train the nervous system? How do we upgrade the software to be able to put out or coordinate or organize smoother movement? That's the big question that I've been trying to solve for the last few years.
Right. And so I feel like there's a bit of a divide in like the industry that we're in. Let's call it, just for simplification, like we're in the industry of fitness, right? Like we surround ourselves, we coach people in movement. They come to us, they have goals of body composition, whatever the case may be. And I feel like there's one camp that's like, if when you have a client come into the gym, you want to get as quickly as possible into whatever modality you're going to use for them to build muscle, build strength, and all the other stuff outside of that I'm going to go to an extreme here, might be a waste of time, right? Then there's people in your camp, and I'm in the same view, where the skill acquisition takes time. And sometimes if people come to you as a personal trainer and they have body composition goals, it's like, do you value more of just meeting those goals and not worrying so much about skill acquisition and acquiring the ability to move smoothly, and you just set them up with parameters that they need to just be able to bang out a squat right away? Or do you value taking a lot of time with your clients in teaching them skill acquisition, maybe doing things that are outside the norm when it comes to classical hypertrophy or strength work? Because I feel like there's a bit of a divide there within the industry. So I want your opinion on that.
I think it's a pretty simple answer. At the end of the day, our job as coaches and trainers is to get our clients towards their goals. So let's say, using your example of the body composite, the client who wants just better body composition, why the fuck would I be talking to them about, feel your foot pressures, improve your balance, make sure I don't know, talk to them about all these kinds of proprioception, vestibular function concepts, when really that's not their goal. So I'm always just going to go to what will get them to the fastest, or whatever the fastest route to the goal of improving body composition is, if the goal is body composition. If I have an athlete on my hands who's trying to get through an entire basketball season, who has certain niggling injuries, well, then I'm going to take the fastest route towards pain management and better movement quality, so that the pain doesn't pop up later. So it always just depends. It always just goes back to the client goals. But I guess from what you see on my Instagram page, is really just what I've been extremely passionate and curious about for the last few years. And so it's like all of that stuff, even though I do have a ton of body composition clients, I still have a bunch of clients who are mainly just interested in building muscle. But all of the stuff that you might see on the social media about me trying to educate folks on motor control and learning and all that stuff is really just a reflection of the subsect of clients that I have with like really athletic goals, or who are trying to get out of pain, or who are just trying to feel more comfortable in their body.
Right. And I think that's probably one of the biggest tools that, as if you want to consider yourself a high level coach, you probably have to live by. Essentially, what you just said there is like you put your ego aside. Like there's things that you, that's it, right? Like there's things that you value. There's things that you're extremely interested in. But at the end of the day, you're not going to jam that down somebody's throat if they're coming in and being like, yo, I just want to lift a shit ton of weight off the ground and I want to work with you for 3 months to get there. It's like, you know, you may have ideas of, oh, I'd love to sprinkle this into their program, or I wish they valued this a little more. But like you said, at the end of the day, you're going to put your ego aside and you're going to do what's best for the client and for them mentally, physically, emotionally. It's going to be ideally, hopefully meeting their goals.
For sure. And I think there will always be opportunities to sprinkle in all of that motor control and learning stuff in. Like, let's say, I don't know, for example, I got like, so one of my clients, like his goal, it's like, he's like just trying to run a sub 145 half marathon. That's just what I'm trying to do. And so of course, 90% of the effort is going to be spent on improving his lactate threshold, improving his aerobic capacity, and just load management so that he doesn't get injured in the lead up to the race. But there will always be opportunities where it's like 10% of the time you are talking about, hey, look how much more output you can get on the treadmill or on this set of strides when you just have a little bit more of a rhythmic arm swing or something like that. You know, so there will always be opportunities because at the end of the day, whether the goal is hypertrophy, whether the goal is body composition, whether the goal is even flexibility, all of it is based off of movement. And movement is a process of motor control and learning. So it's like the thing that ties it all together is like you have to move your body to get it done. So there'll always be opportunities to sprinkle that stuff in.
Yeah, especially if you're a coach that you know what's going on, because then you're like, oh, dude, just hang from that bar we'll go 30 seconds. You're going to take deep breaths and it's going to juice up your forearms, bro. Like we just hit the curls. I know your goal is building muscle. Let's hang on this bar. Your forearms are going to be lit up, but do me a little favor here and take some deep breaths while you do it. Oh, beauty. Sweet. 2 birds with 1 stone.
Yeah, that's it.
Let's, cause like you said, it's probably a 2-pronged question. So if we want to move to, we just talked about smooth movement. If we want to move to like the pain-free side of things, I feel like that's a massive conversation within our industry. Everybody experiences pain. There's no getting around it. But what are some of the big either misconceptions or hurdles that people face, especially if they're not able to work with a high level coach in terms of managing or getting rid of the current pain experience that they're in?
For sure. So I like to break it down into, and there's many ways to break this down, but there's like acute trauma and then there's chronic pain. So when there's acute trauma, there is a large proportion of people that like break a bone or tear a muscle or even have like a little grade 1 strain on like a tendon or something. And they rest, they let it heal, and then the pain goes away forever. And so that's fine. That's fine. But there's also a really large subsect of people that have chronic pain where it's like structurally, you're good. You've been in the MRI, you've done the X-ray, the bone is completely fine, the tissues are completely fine. So where's the pain coming from? And so the most important thing to understand for people that are struggling to get over chronic pain and who are in that vicious cycle of not understanding why it keeps hurting, which by the way, like the less you understand, the more hopeless you feel. And then it just perpetuates in this vicious cycle. But the important thing to understand is that a lot of chronic pain, most of chronic pain is essentially a habit that resides in the nervous system. It's not necessarily coming from a structural issue. It's literally just a loop or like a habit that your nervous system has developed. And there's a lot of different frameworks to view this, but the big kind of thing to Google or ask ChatGPT if anyone's curious is really, it just boils down to your pain is just an issue of central or peripheral sensitization, or you could just say sensitization, which means that an initial injury happened or initial some kind of trauma, some kind of overuse thing happened. Now your elbow hurts. You've done the appropriate rest, but your elbow still hurts. And that's because every single time you feel some kind of stimulus in that chronically painful elbow, objectively, it's like a 1 out of 10. Objectively, it's like a 1 out of 10. But your nervous system is so sensitized. That's where the term sensitization comes from. Your nervous system is so sensitized and so on red alert when it comes to anything regarding your elbow that it turns that 1 out of 10 sensation into a subjective. And by the way, subjective doesn't mean that it's all in your head and that you're crazy. It's still fucking real, but it turns it into a subjective 9 out of 10, get me the fuck out of here sensation of screaming pain. And then what happens when you feel that is that it actually can create efferent pathways to trigger more inflammation and more joint stiffness or more muscular inhibition or more whatever the symptom that's furthering the pain might be. So it just loops back and forth like this, just like a habit.
Right. And so you're saying like subjectively, you're going to feel this pain, and then these signals that are being brought to that sensitive area of the body is essentially just a protective mechanism of the body.
Exactly. Because the brain's number one job is to prevent you from dying or getting injured. So if you've had a past trauma, little elbow strain from I don't know, throwing a baseball or something, your brain takes note of that and says, well, shit, if this guy's going to be using his elbow in that way, well, the next time that there's any kind of small sensation of discomfort, I'm just going to light it up so that we know for sure not to do that again. So it's kind of like you could kind of consider it as like it's an adaptive thing that the brain does, but when it becomes chronic, then it becomes maladaptive, or in other words, like a really shitty, frustrating case of chronic pain.
Yeah. Now, this might be a very difficult question to answer because every case is different, right? Every person who has pain in a certain area of their body, it's always different. How they experience that pain, why they experience that pain. But just for the people listening to the podcast, because I think pain at a chronic level is something that the majority of the population, if not everybody, will go through at some point in their life, which is also a very important thing to have people understand, that everybody goes through it at some point, and it's actually a normal thing to happen. But how do you deal with it from a mental, physical, and even an emotional standpoint? Because I think the emotional standpoint can be overlooked so many times. But just for the general listener of this podcast, like what can somebody actively do to try to lessen that pain? Because like you said, people are like, you know, I've had this pain for years. I've got imaging done. Nothing helps me. I've been to a physio. That doesn't help. What is something that people can do, even if it's as simple as a breathwork practice, a mindfulness practice? What's something that somebody can do to kind of start the journey of trying to fix it themselves?
I think there are definitely steps to the process. And I think step one has to be education. Because when you're not educated, when you don't actually understand what's going on, you really do believe that the pain that you're feeling, it's like, oh, this is making it worse. This is my elbow, the tendons, it's every time I feel pain, it's making it worse. And it kind of loops like that. So step one, before you do any breath work, relaxation, any of that, is just education. And so if I had to, I don't know, like spit out a few really useful resources that someone might use to educate themselves, I would say go down the sensitization rabbit hole, peripheral sensitization, central sensitization. Maybe go down the rabbit hole of polyvagal theory, maybe go down the rabbit hole of reading two really good books, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers and The Body Keeps the Score. So it's like, those are like, I would say pretty good starting points to understand what's going on with your chronic pain. And then after you have a really thorough understanding of what's going on, then the next step is cultivating a sense of safety in your body, convincing your nervous system that your body is safe. Because as Josh mentioned just briefly a couple minutes ago, it's the pain is the nervous system's way of protecting itself, or of protecting your body, because it feels that your body is not safe. So with that line of reasoning, with that logic in mind, well, then step 2 is, how do we cultivate it before we do any kind of rehabilitative exercises and progressive strength training and all that stuff? Step 2 is, can we cultivate a sense of safety within the nervous system? And that can include, the most powerful ones are breath work for sure, nasal breathing, slow breathing. Another really powerful one is simply social engagement or social support. Like, you ever notice, like, I'm sure everybody listening right now could think back to a time when their lower back was hurting a lot, or when something was hurting a lot. And then all of a sudden you've got some kind of social outing that you go to, you're hanging out with your friends, you're laughing, you're having a good time. All of a sudden it's like, oh shit, I forgot about the pain. Where'd the pain go? So that's a huge one, which is social engagement. So we got breath work, we got social engagement. The third one that I'll list is a little bit more broad, but essentially it is just being more in your body, being more attuned to your body, becoming more body aware. Because what happens, here's the reasoning. What happens when your nervous system feels that your body is not safe is that it will either go into like a fight or flight mode, so sympathetic activation, and so where you're not taking in as much sensory input, you're not as body aware when you're in fight or flight, or it'll dissociate, right? Like, unfortunately, we've all heard of victims of like molestation or something that talk about like the lingering symptom is that, yeah, I'm just so dissociated from my body. Well, that was your body's protective mechanism. When it doesn't feel safe, it'll just dissociate from your body. So the super broad number 3 is just develop better body awareness. Stop being all up in here and be more down here.
Who was it that maybe gave you a large inspiration or a push into that domain of fitness? Like, can you pinpoint one person that really pushed you in towards that domain?
Or would you say it was maybe, because that could be the case, and that is the case for some people, or was it more a case of like, you're just such a passionate dude and you've been in this game for a while now, and just the combination of experiences and learning experiences from different people and learning through experience physical yourself, is that how that has been cultivated? Or is there a name that you can be like, yeah, you know what, check this dude out, he's helped me a ton?
All 3. So I'll go through quickly one by one. The first being when you grow up being obsessed with several different sports that I played at a decent level: soccer, volleyball, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, kickboxing, boxing, snowboarding, dance, all of these different things. Over time, the more you would do them, or like go through phases of like being really obsessed with one and then doing another one and then doing another one, the more like a really interesting thing starts to happen, which is where you're like, interesting. Learning how to dance made my soccer agility better. The fuck's up with that? Learning how to slackline made my snowboarding way smoother. The fuck is up with that? Growing up playing volleyball before transitioning into kickboxing made it so much easier to throw a good, smooth, relaxed punch. Like, what is that? Like, that's got nothing to do with flexibility. That's not like me in the weight room doing anything. That's like a motor control thing. So it's like, I think just naturally for any multi-sport athlete, they will be able to have a similar personal story like that, where it's like a felt understanding that, just like you said, more muscle mass doesn't necessarily equate to better movement. More flexibility doesn't necessarily equate to better movement, but taking in more sensory input, being able to solve more physical puzzles, being a more intelligent physical problem solver, does make you a better mover. So that's number one. Number two is quite simply just being pretty obsessed when it came to my university education about studying motor control and learning. Which, yeah, that's a whole rabbit hole in and of itself. But to put it simply, it's like just the formal education on motor control and learning was extremely helpful in being able to understand all of these pretty complex topics, but simplify it in a way that any athlete, any regular human could understand. And then number three, a lot of my friends in my late teens and throughout my 20s were lifelong athletes, multi-sport athletes who were a bunch of thoughtful meatheads, just extremely interested in how to become a better athlete, how to move better, how to get out of chronic pain, how to have better coordination in their body. So it's like, if we take you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, that kind of thing occurred to me. And then really specifically, there's one guy who's still one of my closest friends, and I'm sure he won't mind me saying this, but I met him in university. His name's Chris Kramer. He's a physiotherapist now. And throughout the entire university thing, this guy, everybody knew of this guy. It's like, dude, this guy doesn't fucking study. He just goes in, crushes it 99% and everything. This guy's so, and then we would say, dude, this guy's so fucking smart. He's autistic for sure. He's for sure autistic.
Yeah.
Dude, and then you fast forward, this guy graduates with his physiotherapy degree and stuff, and he's got his own private practice and stuff. But I guess like it is tough when you have like Asperger's or when you're on the spectrum in terms of just like certain things in life is a little bit more difficult. So it's like he did actually eventually get formally diagnosed as having Asperger's. So this guy, just like being close friends with him and how fucking smart, the Rain Man of movement, was a huge influence on me. Like I'll never forget, like it was like 2017 or something when we're having a conversation. And he turns to me and just super casually, he's like, so yeah, dude, like the body's just always trying to self-organize itself against gravity. And I was turning, I was like, what the fuck did you just say?
What the fuck did you just say?
And it's like, to this day, I'm still building on that concept in terms of like the frameworks that I use to coach my clients in terms of making them move better. It's like just shit like that, where you just sees movement come up from a completely different lens. So those are kind of like the 3 big influences on my perspective on movement quality.
Yeah. Awesome. And what are some things that you do within, you can outline like your personal, how you train yourself if you want, but what are some things that are staples in your program today to try to better your movement quality?
To kind of do a quick 180 on the upgrading the software versus the hardware thing, I think it is still extremely important to have a really strong structure, right? Because going back to your brain's number one job is to protect you from dying or getting hurt. Well, if it doesn't trust in the strength of your structure, it will be putting the emergency brakes on your capacity to move. You could be the most flexible, you could be the most athletic, but if your structure isn't good, your brain won't give you access to that movement. So always to this day, at least twice a week, I'll be strength training, and I'll strength train in the most time efficient, high return on investment way, which to me is following like the Paul Chek-esque or Kelly Starrett fundamental movement patterns-esque or JC Santana functional movement patterns-esque way of like, okay, I'm always going to do some kind of loading the gait cycle in some way. So like sprinting, loaded carries, whatever. Going to throw in some kind of lunge pattern, some kind of squat pattern, some kind of hinge pattern, some kind of pushing from all different directions and angles, pulling from all different directions and angles. And then the last one is core, which I categorize as, okay, breathing from a range of motion perspective, breathing from a pressure management perspective, so bracing, and then 3-dimensional movement of the axial skeleton. So can you rotate your spine and rib cage? Can you side bend your spine and rib cage? Can you flex and extend your spine and rib cage? And then progressively overloading that. And then, the actual last category is just isolation training. So it's like none of those movement categories that I listed involve like a hamstring curl. Sometimes I might need a hamstring curl because I had a little hamstring tweak. Okay, I should probably make it feel better by getting like a 20 rep set of a pump. So last category, just whatever isolation exercises I want to throw in there. So that's number one, strength training at least twice a week, high ROI because I don't do it every day. I think every single day, though, what I do, go for a walk, minimum 30 minutes, has to be outside, even if it's raining. Although to be fair, sometimes I do get lazy with it if it is raining. But that's just one of the most potent things that you can do when it comes to making your body feel more relaxed. First of all, it's just it's gait cycle. It's nice, it's rhythmic, it's easy breathing, expansion, compression of the rib cage. It's outside, so you're getting all of those like neurological benefits of like the panoramic gaze and the natural light and the breathing in the sense and stuff like that. So all of it combines to, number one, really convince your nervous system that, oh yeah, your body's safe, everything's good. And then number two, in terms of like the biomechanical specific things of like the gait cycle stuff and the breathing stuff, also super powerful. And then the rest of my time is spent in terms of training on anywhere from like 2 to 4 times a week, doing some kind of more athletic endeavor. So whether it's kickboxing, whether it's dancing, whether it's snowboarding, I'll go through phases, spikeball. I'll go through phases.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that like out of everything you just said, if you want to boil it down into the simplest way you can, I think people can overcomplicate fitness, the health of their body so much. And the real answer, I think, is very simple. Like what you just said, go for a walk outside. We're big proponents of that. We love going either in the morning or at sunset. I mean, down here in Guatemala, sunset walks are pretty electric. So that's usually when we hit it, but it's like, go for a walk. Move your body twice a week. Doesn't have to be some crazy shit like everybody says it does. You just mentioned essentially the basic movements in the gym. You want to do some squats, you want to do some lunges, some deadlifts, some pull-ups, some whatever. Hit some strength work twice a week, go on some walks, and then try to acquire some skills, because chances are coupled with that is going to be a sense of community.
Yes.
If you're going out to play a sport, if you're hitting the hill for a snowboard, if you're getting out in the water for a surf, you're going to be around a like-minded community of people. Hopefully it's outside, and it's just going to bring so much more than just, getting the heart rate up and burning some calories for your mental, for your physical, for everything. But it's a simple answer, right? It's like, be a part of a community, get outside, go for a walk, smash some weights, learn a new skill. Bada bing, bada boom.
Pretty much, man. Couldn't have simplified it better myself.
Yeah. I did want to lead into one more thing, because we were talking about pain management, and one of the best ways for you to clear yourself of that pain or manage it to the best way you can is educating yourself. And there's many facets in which you can do that, whether it's physical education, through literacy, through learning, whatever. And a lot of people may not like to hear that because it can be a daunting process. So it's either like, okay, you got to spend the time, because do you want to live in chronic pain, or do you want to learn how to resolve it? Or do you want to spend the money to hire a high level coach that's going to hopefully help you along in that process? But I'm sure one of a big experience for you was, if you're okay to talk about it, is an injury that you kind of went through, how you were able to work through that, maybe what that injury was, and your experience of dealing with that pain and all the other aspects of the mental, emotional stuff that went along with it.
Yeah, for sure, man. So I would imagine you're referencing when I fractured my head snowboarding in 20.
Yeah, that's the one.
2021 might have been. So yeah, so in 2021, it's a good snowboard season too, man. But me and my buddy were riding out in the backcountry. Long story short, I fucked up. And I flew off a cliff.
Yeah.
I hit my head halfway down, and then like 3/4 of the way down, I got stuck in a tree while I was unconscious. So it's like, it was one of those things where it's like, thankfully somebody saw it. Somebody was there to see it. But apparently it was like, flew off this cliff, and I'm just tumbling, somersaulting. Caught my head on a tree stump, apparently. And then after that, immediately unconscious. So apparently it was just full ragdoll from that point on. and then I just ended up in a tree. And so that was the worst concussion. Like, I fractured parts of my face. There's scar tissue in my frontal lobe through like an MRI scan that they saw. So that was the worst concussion I've had in a long history of concussions since I was like 13 or 14. Like, I'm in the double digits of brain injury. And so the recovery process of that was super gnarly, in that it was like, dude, it took me probably 2.5 years to like fully get back to like where, like, my level of function now. Where it was for a full year, I couldn't walk. I couldn't walk because my brain was so sensitized to any kind of motion or any kind of like vibration in my body, that as soon as my foot, I would be walking, my foot hits the ground, the kind of vibration would travel up into my skull and just trigger a migraine. And then of course I had all different kinds of cognitive issues, memory loss, like slurred speech, insomnia, gastrointestinal distress, all of the symptoms of just classic concussion stuff. And that, who gives a fuck about that? Because
but I bring this up because, like, you know, if you're an educated dude and you have a university degree, like, that's all great. And people can feel comforted by the fact that if they're coming to you for advice, they're coming to you for help, that's a big piece of the puzzle. But when somebody's lived it, like when you're like, no, I've experienced this firsthand, I know the pain that you're going through, if not more than you could ever imagine going through. And it took me time, but I've worked through it. That's why I bring it up, because I think it's a valuable piece of like who you are and why people should value what you have to say. Because it's like, dude, I've been through the shit.
Appreciate it, man. So in terms of the lessons, though, it was that, okay, I already had a really good understanding that social engagement, social support, breathing, basic health habits will get you a long way in terms of addressing all of the chronic symptoms that I was experiencing. So, but it kept lingering. Like, I really was like, maybe I went from like a 0% function over 2 years to like 30%, 40%. But thank God I had that social support around me. Thank God I had already ingrained some really good health habits. But what really changed the game for me, and this is what's super important to understand for anybody listening with chronic pain, not just concussion symptoms, is that what really changed the game was realizing that all of the symptoms that I was experiencing was fully due to a nervous system that felt unsafe. So specifically, what that meant for me was that every time I would feel a headache come on, or I would feel the memory loss come on, or I would feel confusion or vertigo or dizziness, immediately my brain would start looping into, oh God, my brain is fucked. My brain is fucked. I'm never going to get back to normal. This is going to be for life. What do I do? And that kind of anxiety loop, that kind of sensitization to the symptoms that I was feeling, just kept looping in like a snowball manner, where actually there was a period where instead of getting better over time, my symptoms were getting significantly worse. And so it wasn't until I met a guy, shout out to Dr. Cameron Marshall, also an Ontario guy. He's the CEO of a company called Complete Concussion Management, I believe it is. And he taught me that the approach that, at least in North America, the approach that we're taking in terms of concussion management, chronic concussion symptom management, is completely sideways. It's all fucked up. It's all wrong. Because the thing is, even with a really bad concussion like me, where there was physical structural damage to my brain, most of the stuff heals within like 3 to 6 months. So now that begs the question, okay, so then when you're feeling that headache, when you're feeling all these symptoms, what is that then? If it's not the structure, what is that? Well, it's just another case of sensitization. Anytime I hear a loud noise, my brain is so sensitive, my nervous system is so sensitized to that, it turns it into a 9 out of 10 headache. Anytime I see a bright light, that's just a little dim light, turns it into a 10 out of 10, the brightest thing I've ever seen. It gives me a headache. Anytime my foot hits the floor, small amounts of like vibration or impact to my body turns it into a 10 out of 10. And so that was like understanding that and really truly understanding the mechanism of how that specific form of chronic pain, chronic concussion symptoms was manifesting and what it actually was. Again, going back to number one, the most important thing is education. Just the education piece of it, that every time I felt symptoms, it wasn't a structural thing, that my brain wasn't actually getting more fucked structurally. That brought me from like 30% to like 60%, just the education. And then when you stack on top of it, all of the doubling down on your efforts to make your nervous system feel as safe as possible while progressing yourself into essentially like strength training your way through all of the triggering symptoms of bright lights, loud noises, cognitive load, whatever, that brought me to like 70%. And then you will love this because that's how we started the podcast. The thing that brought it to 100%, I was like, okay, well, so if the thing is that if chronic pain, obviously we're talking about concussions, but any kind of chronic pain is a habit within the nervous system. How do we change habits? Well, the only way to change habits is to become as mindful in the present moment as possible, because that's the only time when behavior change can take place. And number two, when your brain in as a neuroplastic, malleable state as possible, like after exercise or like after some kind of stimulating activity or like after a good night of sleep. And then what do we know about psychedelics, right? There's not a ton of research yet, but we do know for sure that psychedelics opens up a huge window of neuroplasticity. And I don't think there's any research on this, but you can kind of extrapolate based off of like the visual acuity studies and stuff. But anyways, we also know that psychedelics can shoot you into like a hyper state of mindfulness and presence. So with that understanding in mind, that mindfulness and neuroplasticity is the key out of any habit, and that chronic pain is a habit, well then, with a buddy trip sitting for me, I did another 5-gram dose of mushrooms. And then after that, dude, it was like from 70% function to like 95%. And then out in the following like month, 95% to 100%.
Yeah. I think that's where we should wrap this up.
Yeah.
I think the insight that you've been able to provide us, our audience, is massive. If you're listening to this podcast, you're very fucking welcome, because you should maybe listen to it again.
Yeah, a couple times over.
Yeah, because Patrick is a real one. You're an absolute G, my dude. We followed you for a long time. We highly respect what you have to say. We think, as many people that can reach you as possible, the better. And
hey, we're going out to BC later in the summer, so
pull up, boys.
Let's go.
100%. If you could just kind of link your socials, anywhere people can find you, maybe even like work with you online, if you just want to drop that right now for the audience.
Yeah, for sure, man. Social media, Instagram at Thoughtful Meathead. I got a YouTube channel too, but basically I'm just reposting Instagram reels onto YouTube. You can find my website where I write blogs and stuff at pkhealth.ca. And then if you want a really affordable option in terms of educating yourself and getting the actual practical exercises and tools to improve your movement quality, I just released an online community with a bunch of different educational modules and training programs called Thoughtful Training. And you can find that via my Instagram.
Amazing, dude. Well, we'll definitely have to do this again. I think next time we got to get Luker on the pod too. Because when it comes to like the psychedelic realm, we've done our fair share of dabbling, but in terms of education, like I think you and Luke would hit it off. You guys would have some good conversations and some things to say to each other. So I think next time we got all three brothers on the pod. And but yeah, dude, we got to do it again soon.
Maybe there's even a mushroom trip out in BC
maybe there's a mushroom trip BC and then post podcast at the Thoughtful Meathead headquarters.
That would be nuts, man. That would be nuts.
Awesome, dude. Well, we appreciate your time, and we'll definitely do it again soon.
Thank you, boys. Appreciate it.
The Primitive Patterns Podcast. It's time to live your mystery.